Perhaps no one would expect the places labeled most dangerous for female solo travelers to be where you discover your deepest sense of safety. A woman walks alone through a night market in a city ranked among the world's most feared destinations and feels more secure than she ever did on a crowded street in a city tourists flock to without hesitation. That gap between where the fear lives and where the danger actually is has a cost. Trips not taken. Places never seen? What if the world's most misunderstood destinations hold the keys to understanding what safety really means when you travel alone? The data tells a different story than the headlines suggest. Women reporting anxiety about travel rose from 64% to 70% in just 1 year, yet this fear isn't tracking with where harassment actually happens. A 2015 study by OCAC Chile found that 85% of women reported suffering some form of harassment during their lifetime in Chile, but Chile wasn't on most travelers' danger radar until the statistics surfaced. Meanwhile, the places that dominate every avoid at all costs list reveal a more complex picture when you examine the actual numbers. Egypt, consistently flagged as high risk for solo women, actually scored 82% for people feeling safe walking alone at night in the 2025 Global Safety Report. But when you compare that to harassment rates in some of Europe's most beloved destinations, the narrative fractures. Paris, the romantic capital that fills Instagram feeds with café culture and sunset Seine walks, has documented cases of women being stalked at night and chased by groups of men, with bag snatching and pickpocketing being particularly common. The city, actively encouraged as a solo female destination, carries harassment statistics that rival those of countries labeled extreme risk. The disconnect becomes starker when you examine how targeting actually works. Scams often rely on distraction and tourists' lack of local awareness, and women are specifically targeted because thieves assume they may carry more valuables and may be less likely to resist. Yet, official consular advisories from Canada, the United States, and other governments warn that petty criminals, scammers, and occasionally organized groups exploit busy tourist areas in many European cities, not in the remote villages of countries labeled extreme risk. Researchers call this phenomenon false danger maps. That gap between where the fear lives and where the danger actually is has a cost. Trips not taken, places never seen. Countries like Morocco, India, and Egypt dominate the dangerous for women headlines, while Western European cities including Barcelona, Rome, Lisbon, and Amsterdam all have well-established tourist infrastructure and visible police presence in busy areas. Yet the day-to-day harassment statistics don't always support the safety perception that keeps women away from other destinations. What's particularly revealing is how the corporate travel industry acknowledges this gap. A 2025 GBTA survey found that although most travel buyers, 74%, are women, only 27% say their corporate travel policies specifically address female traveler safety. Even the professionals sending women to these destinations aren't matching their policies to the actual risk profiles. The result is a generation of women making travel decisions based on headline fear rather than ground truth. Places that appear on every most dangerous list might have lower harassment rates than the European capitals where solo female travel is actively encouraged. The world's danger map for women isn't drawn by the women who've actually walked these streets. It's drawn by the stories that generate the most clicks. Traditional values in these supposedly dangerous places often create the most protective environments for women travelers, a paradox that Western safety frameworks consistently misread. Morocco, consistently flagged as high risk, operates on a system where conservative social structures function as protective scaffolding rather than restriction. The same cultural norms that travel advisories interpret as limiting women's movement actually create accountability networks. A solo woman is not invisible, and her presence is noticed and often actively safeguarded by locals who view her as a guest under implicit community protection. This protective mechanism works differently than Western security infrastructure. In more conservative regions, particularly across the Persian Gulf, solo female travelers become objects of genuine curiosity rather than targets. The cultural expectation that women travel with companions means a woman alone signals something unusual, and that visibility, paradoxically, becomes her shield. Locals are more likely to approach her with concern than to exploit her. The harassment that dominates statistics in Western European cities, where women blend into crowds and predatory behavior operates in anonymity, functions differently in societies where a stranger's presence is inherently notable. Egypt demonstrates this protective paradox most clearly. The country's reputation for scams and danger obscures a deeper truth. The same cultural values that restrict certain behaviors also create social consequences for harming a visitor. Tourist police presence is visible, but more importantly, the informal social contract, where locals take responsibility for guest safety, operates as a parallel protection system. A solo traveler's experience often reveals that locals genuinely want visitors to feel secure, not because of formal policy, but because hospitality and guest protection are embedded cultural values. The Middle East's reputation as universally dangerous for women crumbles under examination. Cities like Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and Doha consistently rank among the world's safest for solo female travelers, yet these destinations rarely appear in mainstream safe for women travel discourse. The infrastructure is present: police, security, formal systems. But the invisible protection comes from cultural norms that make harming a woman traveling alone socially unthinkable. The stares and remarks that Western travelers interpret as threatening often stem from genuine concern rooted in protection rather than predation. A non-Arab solo female traveler is unusual, and that unusualness triggers a protective response, not a predatory one. The attention Western frameworks read as danger is actually the activation of cultural safeguarding. So if women reporting anxiety about travel rose from 64% to 70% in just 1 year, but the places that make headlines for being dangerous might actually have better safety records than the European capitals everyone considers safe, where does that leave you when you're choosing your next destination? Comment your answer below. Now let's examine what happens when you dig deeper into the actual experiences of women who've walked these supposedly dangerous streets. What's particularly revealing is how European harassment statistics dwarf those of many avoided regions. The 4 Nordic countries, Sweden, Iceland, Norway, and Denmark, are among the 5 countries with the highest rate of reported sexual violence in Europe in 2023, with almost 200 cases per 100,000 inhabitants reported in Sweden. These are destinations that consistently top safest for solo women rankings, yet their reported sexual violence rates exceed those of countries that dominate danger lists. The gap between perception and documented reality creates a false security that leaves women unprepared for the harassment patterns that operate in broad daylight within Europe's most celebrated tourist infrastructure. The result is a generation of women making travel decisions based on headline fear rather than ground truth. Places that appear on every most dangerous list might have lower harassment rates than the European capitals where solo female travel is actively encouraged. 64% of women experience unwanted attention while traveling solo, but this number does not decrease based on accommodation tier. It decreases based on destination choice, neighborhood, time of day, cultural context, and the experience level of the traveler. The world's danger map for women isn't drawn by the women who've actually walked these streets. It's drawn by the stories that generate the most clicks. What happens when you strip away the headlines and examine the practical intelligence that experienced women use to navigate any destination, including the ones that dominate every danger list? The transformation from fear to informed confidence isn't about ignoring risk. It's about reading the signals that matter. The women who walk confidently through supposedly dangerous destinations possess a different kind of literacy, one that operates beneath the surface of government advisories and travel warnings. They understand that safety isn't a binary state but a dynamic assessment that changes block by block, hour by hour. In Morocco's Medinas, they know that the aggressive carpet seller who follows tourists for 3 blocks poses a different threat profile than the quiet man who's been sitting in the same cafe chair for 2 hours watching the street. The difference isn't visible in crime statistics, but it's immediately recognizable to someone who's learned to read social patterns rather than relying on destination rankings. This practical intelligence reveals itself in how experienced female travelers approach the places everyone warns them to avoid. That gap between anxiety and actual risk represents millions of women making decisions based on secondhand fear rather than firsthand assessment skills. The women who navigate confidently aren't necessarily visiting safer places. they're applying a more sophisticated risk-reading framework to any place they go. Consider how this intelligence operates in practice. In Egypt, the country that appears on nearly every avoid list, experienced female travelers distinguish between the tour guide who positions himself between you and aggressive vendors versus the one who disappears when money changes hands. They recognize that the hotel receptionist who asks detailed questions about your daily plans might be demonstrating protective concern, not intrusive surveillance. These aren't insights you gain from reading travel advisories. They're pattern recognition skills developed through understanding how protection and predation actually manifest in different cultural contexts. Solo female travelers assess destinations across 5 dimensions: infrastructural security, social norms, legal structures, digital support, and community trust. But the most crucial dimension doesn't appear in any official framework: the ability to distinguish between attention that signals danger and attention that signals concern. In conservative societies, a woman traveling alone generates curiosity that Western frameworks consistently misinterpret as threat assessment. The stares and questions that trigger anxiety in inexperienced travelers are often the activation of informal protection networks, locals ensuring that the unusual presence of a solo woman doesn't go unnoticed by those who might exploit her. This cultural literacy becomes your most powerful safety tool. The woman who understands that persistent offers of help in certain contexts signal genuine hospitality rather than set up for a scam navigates with confidence that no government advisory can provide. She knows that in societies where women traditionally travel with companions, her solo presence makes her memorable to shopkeepers, restaurant owners, and taxi drivers, and that memorability becomes a protective factor rather than a vulnerability. The practical intelligence extends to timing and positioning. Experienced female travelers understand that the same street can shift from completely safe to actively dangerous based on factors that have nothing to do with the destination's overall safety ranking. They know that the hour between afternoon prayer and evening call to prayer in Muslim countries often represents the quietest, safest time to move through neighborhoods, while the period immediately after evening prayer brings renewed street activity and social accountability. They position themselves near families rather than groups of men, seek out female vendors in markets, and understand that the woman selling vegetables from a permanent stall has different motivations than someone approaching with friendship bracelets. This intelligence transforms how you interpret the very signals that generate travel anxiety. The attention that Western women fear in Middle Eastern countries often stems from genuine curiosity about a solo female traveler, a signal not of predation, but of the activation of social awareness that, in these contexts, becomes your protection. When you step beyond the fear map and walk the streets that everyone warned you about, something profound happens that no safety ranking can measure. Those who've moved past the headlines into the lived experience of these supposedly dangerous places discover connections that transform not just how they travel, but how they see themselves in the world. The transformation isn't theoretical, it's visceral. You're sitting in a tea house in Morocco's Atlas Mountains, and the proprietor brings you extra mint tea without being asked. His wife emerges from the kitchen to check if you need anything, speaking no English but communicating genuine concern through gestures that transcend language. This isn't the predatory attention that travel advisories warned you about. It's the activation of protection networks that operate invisibly until you need them. In India's supposedly hostile environment for women, you discover that the persistent questions from shopkeepers aren't intrusive surveillance, but genuine investment in your well-being. The rickshaw driver who asks where you're staying, what time you plan to return, which route you'll take, he's not gathering information for exploitation. He's creating informal accountability. Tomorrow, if you don't appear at the usual morning chai stall, someone will notice. That visibility, which Western frameworks interpret as vulnerability, becomes your safety net. The women who've walked these streets understand something that doesn't appear in any government advisory: the difference between being watched and being seen. In conservative societies where solo female travelers are unusual, your presence generates a protective curiosity rather than predatory interest. The tea seller remembers your face. The hotel receptionist asks detailed questions about your daily plans, not from nosiness, but from responsibility. In cultures where hospitality is sacred, your safety becomes a community obligation. This cultural protection operates on principles completely foreign to Western security models. In Egypt, the same social structures that restrict certain behaviors also create consequences for harming a visitor. Safety is no longer defined only by low crime statistics. It is defined by how a destination feels at night, how easy it is to ask for help, and whether women are culturally respected as independent travelers. The informal networks that keep you safe don't appear in crime statistics. They appear in the way locals position themselves between you and aggressive vendors, the way conversations pause when you walk past to ensure you're not being followed, the way directions come with warnings about which streets to avoid after dark. What emerges from this experience isn't just confidence in navigation. It's a fundamental shift in how you understand your place in the world. You realize that the anxiety you carried about being alone, about being vulnerable, about being female in foreign spaces was largely manufactured by systems that profit from your fear. That gap between where the fear lives and where the danger actually is has a cost. Trips not taken. Places never seen. Those who discover this truth become different travelers entirely. They stop choosing destinations based on safety rankings and start choosing them based on depth of experience. They understand that the stares in Middle Eastern markets often stem from fascination rather than threat, that the questions about traveling alone come from concern rather than judgment, that the attention they receive is frequently the activation of cultural safeguarding rather than targeting. This transformation extends beyond travel into how you move through the world at home. When you've navigated Cairo's chaotic streets with confidence, when you've felt genuinely protected in places everyone told you to avoid, when you've experienced hospitality that exists purely because you're a guest in someone else's homeland, you carry that knowledge forward. You stop accepting limitations based on other people's fears. You start trusting your own assessment of risk versus reward. For extra peace of mind, especially if you travel solo, hike, drive remote roads, or explore unfamiliar places, consider carrying a discreet safety accessory. Necklaces, bracelets, fitness bands, keychains, and more can look like normal everyday items, but with a quick press, they can send an alert and your location to chosen contacts. And one more thing, learn a few basic self-defense skills before your trip. You do not need to become an expert, but knowing how to create distance, get attention, escape a grab, and trust your instincts can make you feel much more confident. You do not need to travel scared, you just need to travel prepared. Test your safety device before your trip. Check that it works where you are going. Share your plans with someone you trust, and always listen to your gut. Subscribe to my channel and download your free safety guide now.